Tomorrow, a recommitment ceremony to the Bangsamoro peace process will take place, and many parties with a stake in it will take part. The initiative is led by the Geneva-based Principles for Peace Foundation in partnership with Philippine organizations including InsightGov, Initiatives for International Dialogue, and the Gaston Z. Ortigas Peace Institute. What are these Principles for Peace? And why does the Bangsamoro peace process need recommitment? Good evening, I'm John Nery and you are in the Public Square. With us tonight are Hiba Casas, Executive Director of the Principles for Peace Foundation, former Secretary Teresita Ging Deles, who was Presidential Peace Advisor, oversaw the negotiations on the Comprehensive Agreement on the Bangsamoro, and Karen Tañada, Executive Director of the Gaston Z. Ortigas Peace Institute. Good evening, Hiba, Sec Ging, and Karen.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Thank you for joining us in the Public Square. Let me start with a question for Hiba. Principles for Peace sees itself as a 21st century framework for resolving conflict. What exactly is new about the Principles for Peace framework?
Well, thank you very much, John, and it's a real pleasure to join you today. Maybe I'll say a few words about the Principles for Peace Foundation as an entity, and then I'll get to why it is a 21st century initiative. The foundation, we are based in Geneva, but we are truly a global organization. We're a global initiative, and it's uniting a coalition of over 120 organizations across the humanitarian development and peace and security space. What's interesting about how we've been operating and coming together is that we've been embodying the ethos of government, civil society, and academia. Because in this era, it's very hard to think about all power institutions without thinking of inclusion, without thinking of how do we actually capitalize and mobilize the broader energy of the broader peace ecosystem, which also includes civil society, business, media, traditional and religious leaders. We have been united around a simple idea that we need a common framework for action and a benchmark for progress when it comes to peace. And why do we need that? Because for so long, the peace space has been a bit like the Wild West. In the humanitarian space, we have principles, which says this is a good principle, this is how you respect neutrality or impartiality in your operating. In the case of war, we have the Geneva Conventions, which also provide a common frame of reference. They both are violated often, but they do provide some common grammar, some common benchmark for progress and accountability. In the peace space, we've lacked that for a long time. So that's why we came together first as an international commission, then as one of the broadest coalitions globally, to really try and learn from the great experiences, from success, but also from failure, and to see how we can have a common frame of reference, common framework for action. And that's why the Principles for Peace came to life. And it started really as an effort with an international commission that was truly global. We were very lucky to have Ma'am Ging, who really made sure that we had a lot of learning from the Bangsamoro peace process. And one of our first regional convenings happened here. We've consulted in over 61 countries. We also had other commissioners like the president of Guatemala, Bernardo Arevalo, who we also studied the learning of Guatemala and many other countries. But essentially, what's new in this and what's interesting is imagine a situation where from a local community-based organization to a decision maker at the highest level of government, having a common understanding of what does it take to build peace. That's what we're trying to achieve with these Principles for Peace, having unity of vision, unity of purpose, and really trying to think about it as teamwork, that it's not only the business of government officials and those in the hot seat, but also it is a collective responsibility to move towards a common goal. We have different roles to play, and we can definitely get that. And finally, what's also new is around really learning from the past. And I often use the analogy of imagining, rebuilding a house after an earthquake. You would want to consult the engineers to make sure that the foundations are solid. But it's not enough if you're not talking to the people who live in the house to see exactly what they need. And for so long, this field has become so technocratic, so professionalized, that it got a little bit removed from the aspirations and lived experience of the people. So this is what we're trying to do in catalyzing the peace ecosystem around the 8 principles for peace.
Okay, maybe, well, definitely we'll have time to dig deeper into the 8 principles for peace. But I want to bring in Sec Ging into the conversation. You're a member of the governing board of the Principles for Peace Foundation. Can you tell us how the foundation, Principles for Peace, sort of adopted the Bangsamoro peace process and the dynamics of the involvement here?
Yeah, so I was invited to be a member first of the International Commission on Inclusive Peace, which was the group that studied and finally, after 2 years, launched not a report on the work of the commission, but a covenant, a peacemaking covenant, symbolizing that this was not just going to be some report, but it was to be able to move people into that directions that had been pointed out. And as Hiba had said, the Bangsamoro experience was a part of that discussion. That part of what the whole process was trying to learn from. And when the principles was launched, and one of the interest, of course, was to see how does this really work on the ground. And the question was is it relevant for the Bangsamoro? We have a comprehensive agreement on the Bangsamoro. It seemed to be going well. Well, we have not had any big conflagration since the signing in 2014. Does it make sense, this whole process, this whole framework, does it have a place in this? And I was asked, and I said yes, definitely, because the process now, implementation stage, presents in fact new challenges, and the terrain becomes more unknown, uncharted. There were aspirations that had been put into the comprehensive agreement. How does this work now with real people, with real politics? And it seemed that everyone had assumed not everyone, but most people had assumed when the agreement was signed that it was done. The work was done, there's relative quiet there now, and everybody just moved on to other stuff. When in fact, the new challenges are there. When you resolve a vertical conflict, the horizontal conflicts are in fact sometimes ignited. They have more space to work on. There's going to be an election at the end of the transition period that brings in new contestations over still unresolved conflicts of land, of old things that communities fight about. Peace dividends still needed to be brought to the ground. So there was it continues to be a perilous ground. And as we had learned during the negotiations, how important it is that people will come on board. It is not just the work of the panel. It is not just the work of the two parties. It's not just the two sides putting their guns down and saying we will not fight each other anymore. It had to be owned by everyone, and not just by the Bangsamoro, not just by Mindanao, but the whole country. So could the Principles for Peace be a new platform? A platform, again, to say, hey, the work is unfinished here. We need to all get back here and look at this. We need to help this process along, support it. And we found it, the foundation and the people here, suddenly realized, yes, we haven't been paying attention. The way, the not so usual suspects like business, even the church said, we used to be very active here. We used to have a bishop, a cardinal, in fact, speaking very regularly on this, and we haven't been doing that.
Like you said, I think many people thought with the signing,
tapos na.
it was done.
Yes.
When in fact the new work had just started.
Yes. So we launched the Principles for Peace here in July. And it ignited a new energy. People were happy to come together, and government and civil society speaking again, and all the other sectors, and saying, yes, how do we put this process forward so that we ensure that the comprehensive agreement on the Bangsamoro, it's completed, it's not going to solve all the problems, but let's not burden it with unfinished business of a peace process.
We'll have time later to go back to the challenges that you mentioned. I want to bring in Karen, who's been a prominent player in the peace scene. Karen, why is it necessary for a recommitment ceremony? And what does your organization, the Gaston C. Ortigas Peace Institute, expect to happen from engaging in this recommitment ceremony?
Yeah, I think we have found it important to study again, to understand what we have been through. The peace NGOs, and many of them, not only in Mindanao but in the other parts of the country, have been working all these years.
That's right.
More than 2 decades. Through even more during the all-out war, and then there in 2003 again. We tend to get more active when there's the active conflict, and now many of them are still active, working more on projects, supporting in Mindanao with different projects, supporting governance, supporting some of the socio-economic, a lot of capacity building with different Bangsamoro groups. Yet we see that there are still some major challenges that we have to face, particularly with some glitches with normalization and other things with delivery of services, which are really very challenging for any government. But we see that we have to think more strategically how to support this, and also to bring in other sectors, as we said, business, academe, and but without neglecting all the other important sectors that have to be there, including the indigenous peoples, to ensure still the inclusivity of the whole process. So we find that this recommitment process is important for us to look back and then to see where we are going, but also to be more deliberate, to see what has actually been achieved, and in some ways to monitor more directly the processes, what are in a way some of the goals that have not been met, and to also to continue to talk with the parties, both sides. Some have been talking more often with the Bangsamoro government, but also with the national government to see their roles. So to talk to both these sides, and then to push, particularly where there are things that need to be done. But for example, in normalization, the amnesty has still to proceed. The transitional justice, in particular, has been very slow, or has not really moved at all on the national level. So these are things that we have to push, and so we have to. It needs more concerted effort on the part of civil society and the different parts of civil society to be involved.
According to the Peace Research Institute, Oslo, most peace processes fall apart in 7 years. So it's been 10 years. It will be 10 years in March since the signing of the comprehensive agreement on Bangsamoro.
And 10 years, the last years of which have been some of the most violent in modern Philippine history.
That's right.
Yeah, so it's 10 years of very challenging times that it's managed to hold.
I want to talk about the challenges, but before that, I want to ask, what are the success factors? What has allowed it to last 10 years? Ging?
Well, I think what we work to have the process owned, not just by the ones who sat on the table at that time, has helped to hold it. It's like the Bangsamoro became part of the consciousness of ordinary people. So that I was told this early when I first crossed over into government. When you have an idea that it gets so embedded in the public mind that it cannot just be dropped. That's what happened with the Bangsamoro, I think. Part of that is, for example, up to now, sometimes I ride the Grab, and they recognize me, and they will say, "You were in government," and I say, "Yes, I was with the Bangsamoro." Oh, the Bangsamoro. It's like that ownership that we were able to instill. I think has helped to hold that it had even though the constituency, as we say, had dwindled because people thought it was done. There was a core. There was a core that had been able to stay. The agreement, I think, was
Agreement itself, yeah.
because it tried to learn from the past. That was number one directive from President Aquino: learn the lessons from the past. And so it helped. We looked at the gap because we've had many agreements before. And the directive also that you don't promise anything that cannot be implemented. So that practical side that had been thought out, this was a doable. It's a doable peace project. It's owned by the people.
It's owned by the people. The agreement itself learned from the past. Karen, what other success factors help explain?
I still think it was also that the major actors,
Yeah.
the state and the MILF also had the
They were ready for
determination
it.
and the will to do it.
Definitely.
They knew that the MILF, I think, knew that their communities wanted peace, and so from 1997 throughout they tried to keep to that ceasefire. So I
Yes.
think that was also very important.
Now I wanted to ask Hiba, and also this is a way for me to understand the 8 principles. The 8 principles for peace, you also describe them as a diagnostic tool for understanding conflict or the peace process. How would you use these 8 principles? I mean, we don't need an exhaustive analysis. Just give us an idea of how you can use this as a diagnostic tool to diagnose what are the remaining challenges of the Bangsamoro peace process.
Yeah. I mean, to go there, I have to recognize that we actually learned a great deal from the Bangsamoro peace process in the principles formulation themselves, because I think it's one of, when we compare it to other peace processes, and you talked about the statistic that most peace processes tend to break down after 7 years. And I can add another statistic that around a third of peace agreements are not implemented at all, and 2/3 of the agreements are only partially implemented. So when you put these factors, in the scale, you actually see that the Bangsamoro peace process is one of the success stories globally when it comes to peace. It's actually defying a trend that we see in many parts of the world. And the other part is the fact that in the Bangsamoro peace process, you actually adopted principles. And these principles are featuring in the principles for peace. The principle of dignity, the principle of humility in how you engage, the principle of subsidiarity, which is at the heart of the peace agreement in terms of the autonomy and the governance. So there's a great deal that we've learned from the Bangsamoro peace process. Now, what have we learned globally? We've learned that often peace breaks down for 3 reasons. One, because of a legitimacy deficit. And this legitimacy deficit is often fueled by 2 key drivers. Exclusion, the fact that people are not included in the peace process and in its implementation. And second, frustration that there isn't enough tangible peace dividends. It's a question of economic prospects, accountable governance, access to justice.
They don't see a difference.
They don't see a difference, and they don't see that the aspiration of the agreement is being translated. And the second one is truly this exclusionary idea of how do you actually capitalize and engage the peace constituency after. And the third reason for failure of peace processes is actually the fact when the peace agreement fails to transform the key conflict drivers that pre-existed. So it just puts a lid on a pot. That was behind the 8 principles for peace as a framework, as a diagnostic tool. So that's why we have 2 key principles, the principle of enhancing legitimacy and accountable security, as key foundational principles to bring in a strong attention on questions of how do we ensure inclusion, how do we ensure tangible peace dividends, that peace is more than political peace. It's not only the act of, political elections, and it's accountable governance, it's economic prospects, it's tangible peace. And we've been hearing that a lot from the consultations that we've supported here from civil society. And then the 3 other principles, which in a way operationalize how a peace process can be successful in its implementation, and that's the principle of pluralism, that we're looking at inclusive outcomes, that we're looking at the social contract, that we're looking at how does diversity play out, so it's not seen as a threat, but actually enriches and the society. The principle of subsidiarity as a governance principle, and I think the Bangsamoro is a key example that we studied very closely, where you see that really in terms of vision, how the principle of subsidiarity is translated. And then also the principle of hybrid solutions. And hybridity is very important because often we try and go with one size fits all, but in many cases, a lot of the solutions that are locally led, that's where the ingenuity comes in, and that's where solutions are rooted. And finally, the 3 other principles which we pay a lot of attention on, and they're essential to engender trust and respect and progress, and it's the principle of dignity, because it's at the heart of many conflicts, frankly, and the breach of trust, and the principle of humility and solidarity. So there is a collective moving forward. And when we apply, and they're very, I don't want to go too technical, but they're very concrete metrics where when we are applying this to how the implementation of the Bangsamoro peace process is going, with the vibrant civil society here, with the openness of the government and leadership to actually engage in a participatory periodic review for peace that brings the voices of the different constituencies, you see actually that there is a lot more positive and a lot of opportunities really to advance and galvanize the process. And for us, it's really rewarding for Principles for Peace to see the power of this framework being put into practice. And the Bangsamoro is actually the very first now participatory periodic review for peace that we are launching globally, which will also inform how we do it in other parts of the world.
What about buy-in from the major stakeholders? Did you have a hard time? I mean, I can understand. I mean, they're part of this process, and then you come in and say, hey, we learned from you, but we have these 8 principles, and we want to do this. And so, was there resistance, or what was the dynamic like? So first with the government and the Bangsamoro also, and maybe even the MILF?
Mm-hmm. Well, we went first to the other stakeholders,
okay,
because we had to, make sure it,
mm-hmm.
we talked to many people from academia, the church, business even. Does it make sense to you? And well, the first thing was, they realized, we haven't been paying attention. And it looks like we need to pay attention. And that, you have a new paradigm, a lens. Mm-hmm. Because really, even though, for us who've been working on this a long time, I don't think we ever had come to that point of having a permanent lens to look at what was happening. It was always you were resolving a particular conflict. I mean, we always said a just peace. It had to be a just and lasting peace. Okay. But what did that justice mean? Mm-hmm. And so when the 8 principles came, and we saw, we had talked about dignity very early on. Heidi Yorak, National Unification Commission, the 3 principles for peace of peace, the 6 paths to peace of President Ramos. So much of that had been there, but we hadn't brought it together that way, and we had not tried to talk to other people because this is one of the things that happened in July. Hey, people were using some common language. They were willing to look at the common paradigm.
What about peace NGOs? What was the buy-in process like?
Yeah, so we were involved in before the launch, we had a process of consultation with the principles which had been discussed in other contexts were described. And initially, sometimes there's a reaction that, in a way, it's not really new. So people sort of say, but in a way, we know this, but they also realize that it has been put in a way more clearly, and the key points have been there. So they found it meaningful, aside from the general principles of pluralism, etc. But particularly looking at legitimacy and accountable security, I think people felt that these were important points to consider, and also to find ways to monitor. Because sometimes we just engage without really monitoring directly what has been happening, and then giving a way of giving feedback to the parties. So I think we found this attractive, and that's why they are now quite engaged and trying to bring in other sectors that have not been so active before.
So the peace NGOs really embrace the opportunity to re-energize the peace process?
Yeah, so and in the consultation that we had, we actually also it was a Southeast Asia consultation, and we invited groups also from other major conflicts in Southeast Asia, so including Aceh, Myanmar, East Timor, with one, and others actually by Zoom.
Okay.
Cambodia. So we actually learned also from their different conflicts, and how their challenges now need to be faced with a better framework. So I think the principles for peace became quite meaningful in that context, and we were able to compare also our different situations and see that these could be meaningful in the region. But the Bangsamoro, of course, was as in a way the relatively successful one was something that people all wanted to observe.
That's fascinating. Did you want to add something?
Yeah, I mean, from my side, what really struck me is how vibrant the civil society is here in the Philippines and in relation to the Bangsamoro. And I think where I felt this process added value, because this has been a process that is locally led. It was led by, Filipinos within also the framework of the NGOs and the government entities that are here. Where we played the role was more of an international guarantee, bringing a methodology, bringing a convening space. But where I felt this really added value is really bringing this common lens, this common framework, and a convening space that can consolidate a platform of dialogue around a common set of metrics, and make that dialogue constructive between civil society, business, the government, to see how the process can be moved forward. What kind of pledges can be made? What kind of actionable items can actually make progress move? And this is where it becomes very useful to have these participatory periodic reviews, because a lot of times what we see in many parts of the world is that the implementation of the peace agreements, it's like you're taking a route in traffic. You can take a wrong turn at times, or you have too much congestion and you need to find a GPS rerouting your position. So this idea of having a tool, a diagnostic tool, a feedback loop that brings in both the perceptions and the views of cross sections of society can help us reroute and course correct. And I think that's something that is very powerful, and I'm really looking forward to the pledging event tomorrow, because a lot of work has gone into looking at the state of progress where the challenges are, and what actionable items can take place that can advance the process moving forward.
I have one last question about buy-in. This time from foreign governments who were part of the peace process, members of the International Contact Group, Japan, and so on, the International Monitoring Group and team. What was the feedback like from them about the Principles for Peace initiative and then the recommitment ceremony?
Well, of course, for the international community, it did not start here. The discussions were already, because part of what the P4P was doing was making sure that dialogue was well in place there with state parties, with everyone on board. Of course, there's always there's always interest in getting a clearer picture of what's really going on, reflecting what's also happening on the ground. I think what people were looking to was that, in situations like this, and when there are problems sometimes, small problems, and the people just talk about it, and we were finding out lots of discussion, not lots, but the fora that were happening was a lot of circles of discussion and pointing at who was at fault here, or who was not doing enough, or and everyone's trying to make their point. Not, no, this is the one, this is the side that should have done this, and this is the side that should have done that. And it repeats itself. And every time you come together, you have the same people. And sometimes it gets harder and harder. People get angrier with each other because they don't agree that, what I'm seeing is what you should be seeing. So there was, I think the interest, even from the international community, was to have, if we can get out of just that circle of and be more
constructive and
methodological, and know that everyone's input came in, and somebody is listening, that's trying to put things into place, some clarity. Who is saying that, and who is saying this, and why, and so that we get out of this just circle of diagnosing without consensus, and say, let's, because this is what the tool brings. A common reading of where we are, what the issues are, what are the issues that need to be resolved, what's noise? Important noise, but really noise that doesn't, that needs to be dealt with, but on a different plane. So when they began to see that, when we begin to talk about a process like this, there's interest. There's interest even from people who are into deep discussion on this with this or that party, but that it will be a more consensual process, a more participatory process, and that there will be agreement that, okay, if this is the situation and this is what we need to move, then what can we do? And some of these things that we're going to have to do will be public, and some of the things that have to be done cannot be public. But you begin to grow that community again, that begins to talk about, and that we come together again periodically. I think that is so important. That we to make sure that it's not a one discussion that brings so many insights, but then everything's left hanging. And next time you meet, you repeat the same insight, but you're instead seeing how we can move forward.
I can't help but ask this next question. I personally see the international nature of Principles for Peace as a strength, the international support and goodwill for the Bangsamoro peace process as a source of strength. But in the last few years, as we all know, in the Philippines, there has been an extreme strain of nationalism. to the extent that we've removed ourselves from the International Criminal Court, and we see, and some people, some Filipinos see foreign interference in local processes as exactly that, interference. Is there a possibility that the international nature of the Principles for Peace and will be seen in Mindanao, for instance, as interference?
I don't think it's being felt as really international, but something more, also locally generated and mainly participated in by people on the ground. But what has also been happening is that people really are working very hard on the ground doing their stuff, but sometimes not really having the time to analyze what we are doing, what's going on, and how there are problems being faced, but we can't seem to get over them.
Okay.
So I think this gives an opportunity to get together again, to have a lens for looking at where we are, and in that way it's quite appreciated, but because people are working hard, but somehow we are worried that there's supposed to be an exit agreement
So that's not
on
a
the
factor.
Bangsamoro.
It's not
But-
a factor.
I think what has often been used in the P4P is that locally led, internationally guaranteed. And I think that resonates with the whole process because this was locally led. But international participants were there. But the locals were in the driver's seat. But it was so important to have the international community there to help to guarantee, to help to make, give support. And I think that sense of, we're not an isolated case, and that we learn from others, and what we're learning here, they can be played forward in other countries. And I think that's appreciated by people here.
I think we also appreciated that it was as part of the Southeast Asia, context, where we also learned from others which were more like us. So it's more like a South thing, where we are learning lessons from each other, and not, just from the West or the North. So I think that has also been a good input into our process.
But one of the things that struck me when I was reading up on the material was the phrase peace ecosystem, which you also used earlier. That seems to me to be relatively new. Can you walk us through it? And how is that helpful or more helpful in understanding a particular conflict?
Yeah. I mean, it really stems from a simple idea that at the end of the day, peace and conflict are a web of interconnected socioeconomic and political dynamics. So if we understand that the drivers of conflict could be economic, could be social, could be also political, but also then the solution cannot be only thinking about political peace and thinking about peace builders and thinking about, even certain parts of governments which are more on the executive side. It really becomes that it requires a whole of society approach in order to realize and address both the conflict drivers, but also what makes peace take hold. So the idea of the ecosystem is to go beyond the traditional way of engaging with the peace builders, with the usual suspects, with the converted already on peace issues, but actually to think about who are the different actors who have a contribution, have an impact on conflict dynamics or on peace building, and then on that basis really see how you can engage them and catalyze them in this sector. So that's why our approach is always around catalyzing and convening not only the traditional peace constituency of government and civil society, but engaging with media, engaging with business sector, engaging with traditional and religious leaders, and engaging with different segments of society, thinking about youth, thinking about women, thinking about the positive players, thinking about spoilers, and how you can engage with these. And that was something that we were very committed for in our methodology, in our approach, because we always said that we anchor every finding that we have in three key anchors: in lived experience, in evidence and academic rigor, but also in realpolitik. So whatever is being proposed, it's politically feasible. It's not wishful thinking. So that's the spirit of the ecosystem approach, seeing how we can move the process forward constructively as a collective responsibility, with around a common vision and with a common purpose of consolidating peace, and peace that lasts and that is durable, which in effect is important for business, is important for the broader economy, it's important at different levels.
Sec Ging, you earlier spoke of vertical conflict after it being resolved, perhaps leading to the horizontal conflicts emerging. Can you talk a bit more about that, specifically in relation to Bangsamoro?
The comprehensive agreement, it was to resolve this conflict between national government and the armed struggle, but there are other components of conflict that continue to be there, and in fact was part of the what was discussed even during the negotiation, that there are land conflicts, that's still there. There are ridos family. Political contestation is still very strong. There's even maybe generational conflicts, and so many still excluded. There's the issue of the indigenous peoples, the non-Moro indigenous peoples remains there, and it's when the vertical conflict is the main thing. Those conflicts sometimes get covered under. They get buried under a big bomb, a big armed conflict. Everybody runs together, and there's of course the unity of the Bangsamoro for self-governance, for self-determination, and the ethnic conflicts, as we know, many ethnicities still there. People are willing to overlook that for now because there's this bigger conflict. When that conflict is resolved, it's not taking up so much energy anymore, then these other conflicts continue to be there and need to be resolved. And if we're not paying attention to these, then that can erupt, and for people in communities, sometimes it will not matter whether that conflict is in fact coming from that vertical conflict or that horizontal conflict. My life is again in danger. My children again have to stop going to school, and all of this mix. So, in a way, when the vertical conflict is resolved, there's more time, there's more energy, there are more resources to focus on your other conflicts. So you need to make sure that the resolution of that vertical conflict creates a new governance system, a new way of social contracts that will help bring about the resolution of those conflicts as well.
How can the Principles for Peace help resolve, for instance, land disputes? Right now, I understand that if they are not acknowledged, that would be a legitimacy issue. Like people would question the value of the peace process, right? Or the RIDO, and so on. But how would the Principles for Peace framework help resolve that? Or what would be the steps to take based on the Principles for Peace framework?
Well, again, if you use that lens, dignity, for example, will make sure that you acknowledge, yes, these are legitimate grievances. They're subsidiarity, trying to resolve it at the lowest level possible. For example, in Marawi, There were land conflicts during the Marawi siege. This emerged when the people want to rebuild.
That's right.
That's going to come in, and sometimes national government says, but how do you solve it? And then you find a barangay captain who says, but we know. They might not have the papers, but we know who lived where. We know what belonged to whom, whose family has been there for a long time. So if you're able to bring in a governance system in place there that
Even
takes
at that
that
level.
word, yes, instead of people in Manila saying, we can't solve it because they're all still fighting over who's the land. Bring that issue there, and then, pluralism. Make sure the women are there because they've been keeping the households safe and fed.
Thank you. Karen, you spoke earlier of some of the challenges like the normalization, transitional justice. What are some of the things we should look out for? I mean, I think for many Filipinos, they understand the 2025 elections in the Bangsamoro, which coincides with the national elections. Or not coincides, I think it was deliberate on the part of the government,
one
right?
election.
It was a strategic move. I think most Filipinos would see that as, okay, that's an important milestone. What are the other milestones that we Filipinos should look out for if we care about the peace process in the Bangsamoro?
So many.
Yeah,
But actually, in preparation for the coming election, actually there are many things that need to be done with the normalization. For example, amnesty is an important aspect, and they say that all these should be together because concentration has been on decommissioning, which is like turning over the weapons to the international decommissioning body. But then, if you turn over your weapons, then you will be insecure on how you will protect yourselves, or you may have still an arrest order. So it's important for the combatants and all those who have been who may have arrest orders to have that amnesty. So things also they also see that part of the normalization should be the disbandment of private armed groups. So that's another concern of groups like the combat the MILF. So we will disarm, but then there are all these other armed groups around us. So these are things that need to be worked on by both government and also with the support of the MILF.
So, for instance, decommissioning, also private armed groups, how would the principle of accountable security help us think through a solution for those problems?
Yeah, I think, accountable security has a number of dimensions to it. And one of them is really the fundamental point of looking at security as a public good. How do you actually provide security as a public good? How do you think about very concretely questions of trust between the security apparatus and the population? How do you think about, again, the principle of subsidiarity in how does then security structures and hybrid solutions of how do you actually get the security structures and security sector reform to be mindful of the specificities of different communities? Thinking through also the question, beyond trust, beyond security sector reform, but also thinking through inclusion. How do you also create a system where thinking about security and the protection of civilians and the concerns of communities is done in an inclusive way? So we pose in our diagnostic tool, we often pose some questions when you're thinking about accountable security that really center around accountability, trust, and representation. And being mindful of these factors as you're conceiving the security solutions is something that is really important, because we've seen in many parts of the world, and I'll just give an example, in the Sahel, where sometimes we've rushed very quickly into overly securitized approaches and really investing in the formal security apparatus without thinking enough about trust and how the community sees the security forces. To what degree are they respecting human rights? To what degree are they seen to actually be respecting also traditional and cultural and ethnic diversity? And sometimes it backfired in the trust between the state institutions and the community. So being very mindful about the side of accountable security, thinking about accountability, about trust, about representation is really important.
I have many more questions, but we're running long. So let me just ask one last question for you. Let me tweak the question a bit now. So for Hiba, I'd like to ask, what do you look most forward to in tomorrow's recommitment ceremony? You talked about the pledging covenant, to the covenant and so on. Can you talk about that? And then to Sec Ging and to Karen, what can we look forward to after the recommitment ceremony?
So what I really look forward to is this exchange between the different constituencies that have done a lot of work, a lot of consultations on the basis of the principles, and have identified some concrete actionable items, and I think pledges. Putting that forward to the government, to the MILF leadership, and then really reflecting on that into a mutual pledging framework. In a way, how can the process move forward? And seeing really the start of a participatory periodic review for peace that ensures that there is steady progress, there's accountability, and there's a constructive platform for exchange to move the process forward. So that's what I'm really looking forward to.
Thank you. So maybe Karen and then Sec Ging.
Yeah, we hope to continue with the different groups and the different sectors who will be committing. And we know that there are many challenges, not only in the Bangsamoro, but in the country. This is a time when, there's much talk about possible constitutional change, etc. But we hope to do our part also in the Bangsamoro for peace, and we hope that the work there can be also an inspiration for the rest of the country, that, this is succeeding through the participation and the energy and the work for justice and peace of the people. And we hope that can also, in a way, work for the rest of the country.
Thank you. And Sec Ging?
I think bringing in this broader constituency, so it's not, it's not the seasoned, all-weather constituents just there, but really the broader one, because to be brought into the work of making sure the peace dividends are felt on the ground. And when we talk to business leaders, it's a major interest. How can we really come in? How do we help for business to grow in the area? And we keep on reminding them in a just way. Don't make money there and bring it out. But the peace dividends, it has to be felt by the people, and that needs effort of all types. The other one, which is an element of transitional justice, because there's the transitional justice that's about accountabilities, of course, but really the transitional justice of recognizing the history of these people, and knowing that history is not just Bangsamoro history, it's part of the Philippine history. And therefore, the appreciation of what's happening there. I think it's important that this resolution of the central periphery problem becomes internalized in all Filipinos, because you realize there are so many Filipinos that have never really had a real face-to-face.
Or we might need to redefine where is the center.
Yeah, right, exactly.
Right? It doesn't have to be Imperial Manila.
Exactly. This whole, what does it mean to be an archipelago where every island really is different, and in this particular case, many more layers of differences. But it is all part of what makes us. The whole question in Gomburza of ano bang Filipino, no?
Who is the Filipino?
What does it mean to be Filipino? Maybe it's a new moment for us to rethink that question again, in a sense now, not of what the colonizers and us, but among ourselves, really different peoples that were born in these islands but are different from each other. I think on the very long, on the long term moving forward, if we were going to have peace, for them to really feel at home here, for the Bangsamoro to really feel, yes, we are different, but we are really part of this, and for the Philippines to really have peace and to know that there is, I like to say, the diversity of our rainbow of peoples is something that is really so much better than wanting everyone to be just the same dull old gray. It's the Philippines. To take it personally, it's the Philippines I want to grow for my grandson. Is so much embedded in what's happening in the Bangsamoro.
Thank you. Secretary Ging Deles, Executive Director Hiba Casas, Executive Director Karen Tañada, thank you very much. This has been a most instructive, inspiring conversation. Thank you again.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
That's it for us tonight. As always, the next step for engaged citizens is to take a more active part in rebuilding our democracy. And that includes all of us recommitting to peace. See you in the public square. This is John Nery. Thank you and good night.